You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todayswillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello and welcome along to the latest Today's Wills and Probate podcast. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Vanessa Ugatti onto the podcast. Vanessa is the true worth expert. And Vanessa, I'm sure you're going to tell us an awful lot more about what that means, but thank you very much indeed for joining the podcast.
No problem, David. Great to share some stuff with you today on the subject of getting paid your true worth.
Thank you for the introduction. Yes, we're talking about value, how we demonstrate value to our clients. We're talking about being bold. But I'm going to ask you in the first instance, please, to share a little bit about your experience. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, please, Vanessa.
So, as you know, I'm Vanessa Ugatti, the True Worth expert, and I help professional services, very often legal people, but it can be other services as well, get paid their true worth unapologetically. And I think that word unapologetically is so important because a lot of people in the professions are not confident talking about their charges with their clients. And when people start apologizing, that causes problems because the client then sees that they're not confident and that's going to help them want to push their fees down. So I look at things both from the process perspective, from communication, how people are communicating with their clients in terms of the whole sales process and also managing expectations. I look at the mindset of the person who's having those conversations or not with their clients, their confidence levels, their awareness levels, because all of that will enable people to change from this constant undercharging, underestimating, discounting, overservicing, working with what I irreverently call PITA clients, which stands for pain in the A clients, into being able to be much more discerning about who they work with, much more aware of what they're doing and how they're behaving, so they don't get themselves into those negative behaviors, which means they're making less money, but also working too hard.
We're only a couple of minutes into the podcast and we've already mentioned that dirty word, sales. And for lawyers, for professional services, they do not like that word sales, do they?
No. Well, let me just share with you, David, that I didn't like the word sales either, because I seriously had the problem of not charging my true worth either. In fact, I always say I was totally clueless at charging. And I will explain what that means in terms of how I used to be in a sales meeting, because I was so embarrassed. And I also say I was probably the worst person I've ever met. So even if people are not confident in it, I haven't met anybody who I think is worse than I used to be many moons ago, which is why I'm also the perfect person to help people overcome these problems, giving myself a little plug there. So this was how I was in a sales meeting, okay? So I'd have a prospect, they'd be telling me all their challenges, and inevitably we all have challenges, and they'd be bombarding me with all this stuff. And because I am a heart-led person, as many people I work with are heart-led people as well, I'd be trying to solve all their problems in the sales meeting, in inverted commas, which of course is exactly not what you should be doing. But I was clueless, I was hopeless, and I didn't understand what it was all about. And I knew I wanted to help people, and that was what was driving me. So there's a total imbalance there. That was what was going on. So I'd be having this meeting with somebody. I knew that at some point I was going to have to be talking about money, but I didn't want to because it was just too embarrassing. So my meetings were just taking longer and longer. It's a bit like, when you're in a networking event, the old fashioned networking event where you had to do your 1 minute pitch.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if they still do all of that stuff. And I call it creeping death, because even as somebody who enjoys speaking, I found that process quite challenging. You're waiting for your turn to come, creeping death. Well, it was like that with having to talk about money for me. So eventually I knew I had to say something, so I'd get to that point and I would say some paltry, pathetic hourly rate, and then I would carry on talking because I was just too embarrassed or scared of being rejected. And so that's why I did that. So really, that was the most hopeless possible way of doing things that you could even think about. So I didn't know about sales. I didn't understand sales. And certainly I didn't like the word sales. But I can share something that might help people change their view on the word sales. If you look at sales as serving, sales equals serving. You can't serve somebody unless they buy from you. And I would also say, rather than sales, say creating an environment where the person wants to buy. Because from where I sit and what I do, I don't want to work with people that I can't help or don't want to be helped. So I look for people who want to be helped. And I think it doesn't really matter what your service is. If you have the attitude of, I am serving these people, not serving them in a subservient way, that's not what I mean, but helping them solve a problem, whatever that problem is, then you don't have to see it in a way of sales. And yes, money has to come into it, but money is just an exchange. Somebody asks you to provide a service, that's your expertise and your time, and in return, you give them money. And I know these are just words, and it's very easy to hear words and think, oh, yes, that all makes sense. But when you come to do it, then the crunch comes, because that part of you that is fearful about talking about money will kick in. And then you'll revert to your normal behavior, which is, oh, my God, this is just too embarrassing. And I can't possibly charge them that because that looks like such a lot of money, and I'll just knock some money off. So, we are very irrational as human beings, all of us. I say complex, irrational and emotional, and that's on a good day. So, the word sales, where everybody is selling, everybody who's in business is selling, and even people who are not in business are selling, because every time we want somebody to do something, we're selling in some way, shape or form. But you can replace that word when it comes to business with serving, and making sure that you're serving the right clients in the right way, and that they're also paying you the right amount.
I think there's a lot of organizations out there who don't necessarily appreciate that it is everybody's role to sell. And in fact, the person that answers a phone, they have a responsibility to answer the phone in a way, in a professional manner that befits the organization.
Absolutely.
And that's indirectly selling, because as well as I do, if you pick up the phone to somebody and the way in which it's answered is poor, or there's very little sort of effort that goes into it, immediately it's that first impression thing, isn't it? It's immediately you're sort of very much on guard. I know that demonstrating and teaching people to understand true worth is your job. So I'm not going to ask you to give away all of your industry secrets, but what does charging your true worth mean?
So getting paid your true worth is being really consciously aware of the value that you're providing for your clients, rather than just thinking about what the cost is, the value of it. And in order to do that, we have to understand our own value. And the challenge with that is people don't understand their value, because their value, their expertise, their knowledge is unconscious. It's in their subconscious mind. It's not something that they're thinking about all day, every day. And what we are expert at, we take for granted. It just seems natural and automatic. So for me, talking about this subject, I don't have to sit there and rack my brains. It just all comes tumbling out. And so it's the same for anybody in any service. They have a level of expertise which they have taken for granted. And sometimes things can be easy, but that's easy because you've got 10 years or 20 years experience or whatever to solve that problem for the client. So we're on the back foot, if you like, David, because if that's how we're thinking, then those thoughts that come up about that's a lot to ask them to pay, or I don't know how I can justify my fee, and all the other things that lawyers tend to say, They aren't really true, but if they are in the person's mind, then that's what they're acting upon. So we have to understand our value, and that's a key one. I have the true worth methodology. There's actually 9 parts to it. The other 2 perhaps that I want to talk about are the first one, which is take charge. And what I see all the time is that lawyers and other professionals, other business owners, do not take charge of that whole process, from when the inquiry comes in to having those conversations about the money and, managing expectations of how long something will take, and that clear communication with the clients. And then when something changes later on, the scope perhaps changes, they don't go back and have another conversation. They don't keep the client appraised of costs. I'm not saying everybody's like this, but a lot of people don't. They're not in charge of that whole process. They don't even necessarily bill on time. They don't even necessarily get paid. And, if we do not take charge of the process, of that process as the service provider, then the client actually is in charge of it. Whether you're running your own business or whether you're employed within a firm makes no difference. You need to be business minded and you need to be in charge of that process. And the great news about that is that once you get to be in charge of that process, life actually becomes easier. So it might seem, oh my God, because people don't want to have those conversations because they feel uncomfortable. And so they keep themselves on the back foot all the time. They keep themselves in a position of fear and a position of weakness. And so when something happens, they just don't deal with it. They avoid it. Or if they do deal with it, they don't deal with it confidently. So they still feel like they're on the back foot, and the client can push back or give them a hard time. So taking charge, and it's just great that it fits in with true worth, because taking charge to me is the first thing. And anybody that I've ever worked with, whether it's a firm, whether it's a team of people or an individual, I can guarantee they were not taking charge of that. And it benefits the client, really. We don't think like that because we think other people want to be in charge, but they don't. The client has come to you as the expert. They want you to be in control. I think these days it's not good enough just to be a good lawyer, a good conveyancer, or whatever title you want to give yourself. You have to, both for the survival of the firm, in fact, so your firm thrives, be good at the commercial side, have commercial awareness. And if you're self-employed, definitely you need that. But also for your career progression, because if you're not very good at that, you're not as valuable to your firm as the next person who is good at that. Being just a technical person is not enough anymore. It really is not.
This is a loaded question, because I know, having spoken to you a number of times, that you chuckle at this question, but we're just nice people, aren't we?
Yes, we are. I'm a nice person. I'm a nice person. And I think, one of the fears, David, that people have is actually if they start charging their true worth, are they not going to be a nice person? But that isn't true. Again, it's a separate thing. So I think in people's heads, they get muddled up with charging properly and being nice. They're completely separate things. How we operate as a human being, how we think, is the most challenging thing that we have to get to grips with in life. It's more challenging than anything else. You can learn anything technical, no problem. Mastering one's own mind, understanding how your mind works, is the most challenging thing that you'll ever have to do in your life, because how we think then determines how we feel and how we act, and then the results that we get. So we've got to get to grips with that. So lots of people are naturally, or is it naturally or is it learned behavior, nature, nurture, people pleasers. And I think a lot of people are people pleasers because I think we were brought up by our parents to be people pleasers, i.e., oh, don't do that, it'll upset your mother. So if we've been naturally brought up or encouraged to be people pleasers, then if we think to ourselves, oh, the client won't be happy if I'm charging them this, the people pleasing will kick in, the self-protection will kick in, and there'll be this automatic discounting going on. That behavior becomes a habit which is established, and then that person just keeps repeating the same thing over and over again. So, we're not logical. I said earlier, we're irrational. There is no logic in it. So that's what's going on. So we have habits. And the other thing is that we have to understand as human beings is that we go back a long way, don't we? And we still have a part of our brain, which for those who like technical stuff is the reptilian part of the brain, which is there to keep us safe, to protect us. So we're actually hardwired for fear. And being hardwired for fear means any time we're confronted with any physical danger, that kicks off the fight or flight response. And that enables us to have more energy to either fight something or run away. But the challenge that we have as human beings these days is we don't have an awful lot of real physical dangers going on. But we have dangers that are imaginary ones that we've made up, fears that we've made up in our head. So the fear could be a fear of public speaking, or it could be fear of talking about money. It doesn't really matter what it is. But the exact same process, the exact same reaction happens in the body. The fight or flight response happens in the body, whether it's a real physical danger or whether it's an imaginary danger. So we go through the same thing, but we still get this extra energy, but we can't run away or do anything. So the equivalent of running away is discounting or over-servicing. That's the equivalent to if you had a real physical danger and you actually could fight it. That's all you can do. And that is what, in essence, is going on. So we can't get rid of that part of us. That is there, and that's part of us, and it's necessary, because if we didn't have it, we would be dead. We wouldn't be here. Our ancestors would have died out a long time ago. But that is part of the thing that we have to learn to get to grips with in order to be able to overcome the problems of not managing the client, not charging properly, and so on.
In the spirit of not charging properly, not managing the client, being nice, however you might want to describe it, there's this idea perhaps that you try and entice somebody in by giving things away. And in fact, there's a whole sort of sales methodology around try before you buy, isn't there? How can we demonstrate our value to somebody without that try before you buy piece, or can we?
It's challenging. Clearly, in my sort of business, I always have meetings to find out who people are, what they're looking for, what their challenges are. And I think it's not about giving loads of stuff away in those meetings. It's about establishing what their pain is, what their problem is, and how extreme the pain is, and whether you're the right person to offer them the services. But if somebody goes into a meeting with say a family lawyer, and they start giving all the options away of what they can do, then that person is armed with all the choices they have, and they can go off to somebody else down the road who's a cheapskate and say, oh, just do all this for me. That's the danger. So it's about how can you demonstrate that you are the right person by asking the right questions to help them see that you are the right person to solve the problem for them, rather than just give all the answers to them. And I don't think lawyers do that, because for the same simple reason, they don't really understand that's what they need to do, and they don't understand their own value. So in a meeting that I have, I'm looking to find out what is the value of this person working for me. If somebody's losing 10, 20, 30,000 a year, sure, you should be working with me. If a firm is losing a lot more than that because they've got a number of fee earners losing that, sure, they should be working with me. But I need to find that information out and then say, okay, so this is what we can do. And it's up to them to choose. But with family lawyers or conveyancers or whatever else, because there's lots of other competition out there, then they've got to be very careful about what they share. That's why it's so important, again, to be in charge of those meetings. Or if they do have a meeting where they're going to give some value away, have a fixed fee meeting where they give some value, but make sure the boundaries are there. Because the other thing I hear is that people will do a fixed fee meeting that's an hour, Or they'll do a free meeting that's supposed to be half an hour and a half later, they're still talking with a client. So in essence, you're giving, have everything. So it really goes back in a way to me and my sales meeting, where I was trying to solve all the clients' problems in that sales meeting. You're there to establish what's the client's pain, how extreme is that pain, are they the right fit, can I really help them genuinely? And then I'm in a position to start saying, okay, if you would like to take this further, this is going to be resulting in some work being done, and then there's charges for that. So I think you've got to use that first meeting as an opportunity to find the information out, demonstrate you are the right person without giving all your knowledge away, and turn it into a sales call or a serving meeting, as we like to call it now, not sales.
You've got a range of different pricing models in law now. We've got unbundling coming down the line as well. So there's still the billable hour. There's this increase in fixed fee. In your view, which is the better method to ensure you're charging your true worth? Because whilst the billable hour is fine, it has its limitations. It has this ability to overbill if you're not too careful. But fixed fees carry a huge amount of risk.
They do, don't they? It's a tricky one, David, I think, because there's no perfect answer. There's no perfect solution, in my opinion. And people talk about value pricing, but what does that mean anyway? You're pricing on the value of the result you're getting for the client, and that's not always feasible, because sometimes they may have a job which is very long-winded and takes a lot of time, but there isn't necessarily massive value. But you can't then do that for the value of it, because you're taking all that time, and time obviously is money. On the other hand, there could be a job that you do that takes very little time and the value is huge. Then you could possibly look at value pricing. But taking the two most common ones, the billable hour and then the fixed fee, let's look at both of them, shall we? So the billable hour obviously is flawed for the very reason that it's not really about value, it's about time. And you could have somebody who's absolutely brilliant at what they do and can get a solution very, very quickly, and then and then they've actually undervalued themselves. Or you could get somebody who's not very good and very slow and takes much longer. Then that's going to cost the client more, and that doesn't seem to work either. So I think for me, it's really about being very aware, very self-aware, very consciously aware of what you're doing, and whichever model you choose, still think about what is the value of this to the client, because the value to the client will be such that if the value is huge to the client, there's less concern about the charge. If the value isn't very big to the client, then you've got to be saying, why are we doing this? Is this the right thing to be doing? So the fixed fee, I know I have great delight in talking about the fixed fee, because I think it's a massive problem. I think probably clients like a fixed fee because they know where they stand. Whether the lawyer is able to give a fixed fee at the beginning of a job and be correct or not is another matter, and that's where the challenge lies, because the fixed fee is only going to be as good as the information that they uncover at the beginning of that relationship with the client, isn't it? So if they don't have all the information at the beginning, and it's not really any fault of their own, then the scope of the work can change later on down the line. So that's one of the problems, and we all know this because we hear it all the time, scope creep. So then the lawyer gets to a point in the job, they recognise that the scope has changed, or they don't. They might just be one of these people who've got their head down and they're just doing the work and they don't even notice. If they do notice, if they haven't set it up correctly at the beginning, then they'll probably ignore it, because that whole fear thing kicks in that I was just talking about. And so then they carry on doing the work, they get to the end of the job. Oh, whoops, we're way over what we've said. Oh, we better just slash the fees. We're not going to charge for that. And so they've lost money. So that's one of the challenges. So if you're going to do a fixed fee, you have to seriously communicate clearly what that fixed fee actually means. Is it a rock solid fixed fee, and what is it for, or is it an estimate? That's number one. And then have the conversation whereby if things change, that you'll be getting back to them, and then make sure they're following through. And some people do that well and other people don't do it well, because if people did it well all the time, then they wouldn't have any problems, wouldn't be losing any money. The other challenge is going to be the whole estimating in the first place. So how do people estimate how long it's going to take to do something? And as human beings, we have a tendency, all of us, to underestimate. We naturally underestimate. So if we already naturally underestimate and we're not very good at estimating, then we could be doubly underestimating. That's one of the challenges that we've got with the whole fixed fee thing. So it might be great for the client. It's great for the provider as long as they manage it properly, because it helps the client. And if it helps the client, then it's good. But it's back to, I need to be in charge of this process. I need to be in charge of the communication with the client. I need to tell them exactly what this entails. And if it changes, I need to go back and have that conversation. And I know people don't do it. I was running training for a local law firm some time ago, and one of the actions that one of the delegates took was to go back and have a conversation with the client when the scope had changed. And it turned out that in a 20-year career, she had never done that before the training with me. Wow. And that one extra bit was £1,000 extra that she'd billed. So it can be massive amounts of money that are being lost by not having those conversations. So that's the danger to me of the fixed fee. How well is it being done in the first place? How well is it being estimated, and how well is it communicated throughout the whole process?
We're fast running out of time, Vanessa. You've given some fantastic insight throughout the discussion. But let me ask you this. What can firms do right now that will either change their attitude towards billing or improve their profitability? Again, don't have to share all the secrets of the trade, but just a few snippets of insight.
It's really important for firms to understand that their lawyers, their people, need to be commercially aware. You can't, and I think I've already said it earlier, you can't be in a situation where you're not commercially aware. And I think one of the things that I hear about also is people not getting paid, having lots of WIP that hasn't been billed, and people carrying on working for a client who hasn't paid them for previous work, all that kind of stuff. So I think they need to get tighter on the whole financials of the process, because I don't know any other sort of profession who would be happy to just carry on working for somebody if they hadn't been paid. And yet that seems to happen in the legal profession. Maybe it does happen in other professions, but I think it happens quite often that people do that. So I think we have to be in a position, or they have to be in a position where they get their people trained to be commercially aware. They have to be commercially aware. They can't just be technicians bumbling along. And it's not just about pricing training. So I'm going to do a plug for my stuff versus pricing training, because there's pricing training out there, and pricing training focuses on things like pricing strategy and pricing models that we have talked about today. And it will give you process and what have you, which is necessary. But if you do not address what people are thinking, the emotional side of them as human beings, that won't work for everybody in the firm. So those people who are quite emotional type people, and there's lots of them in the legal profession, and they're great because they care about their clients. They really do care about their clients, and they want to help them. And that's vital, but not when it comes to the expense of the business, or actually at the expense of themselves physically. So one of the things I talk about actually is equilateral triangle. I'm drawing it in the air here. I don't know why I do that, because I know listeners won't be able to see it. But on one side, you've got creating maximum value for your client, which lawyers tend to do as a general rule. On the second side, you've got create maximum value for the business, and that which comes second. And on the third side, you've got really creating a great life for yourself by looking after yourself. And if you do all of those things equally, then you create balance. And balance is about well-being. So the work I do is about the financials, but it's also about the well-being, because you can't have one without the other. It's not about paying lip service to well-being. It's about creating this awareness in your people that they need to be commercially aware, not just for the benefit of the firm financially, but for their own benefit. Because when people take the stuff on board that I teach, their confidence goes up, their self-worth goes up, how they feel about what they do. So their productivity goes up. Everything improves by being able to charge what you're worth. So look at the financials, but look at that aspect, that emotional intelligence aspect, and help your people do that. And if you want help with that, that's what I do.
Some useful tips. Thank you, Vanessa. And just a really interesting discussion, because being paid your true worth is something that I think we all struggle with. And we can often sort of look at the bill, can't we, and think to ourselves, crikey, how much? And we know in our own lives that we're prepared to pay for a good service, or we're prepared to pay for a good product. How many of us are walking around in designer clothes and all that kind of thing? It's something that we don't always practice what we preach. An absolute delight to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing your insight.
Oh, it's just enjoyable for me, David. I love to share. It's just fantastic. Thank you for the opportunity.
The Today's Wills and Probate podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on the Today's Wills and Probate website. My thanks to Vanessa. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todayswillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.